Well, welcome back, and this is the third video we have on natural selection and evolution. So we're going to start putting some specific terms and sequences in about how we start talking and defining natural selection and the kinds of terminology we need to use when answering questions about it. So our learning objectives for this video, you should be able to define the term natural selection and what it means, explain how natural selection and the idea of survival of the fittest are linked, and then outline the different selecting agents that can affect populations, including understanding the terms biotic and abiotic, and which selecting agents fall into which category, and then understand the 5 stages of evolution as outlined by Darwin. This is a particularly important one, and we'll look at a question in our booklets when we're back in class, which will look at how we apply these stages to questions when we're asked them. So you need to be able to get them in the right sequence and know what each stage involves in terms of the evolutionary process and natural selection. So let's get started. There is a brain pop on natural selection which goes through, which help to reiterate the vocabulary, and I do encourage you to watch it. Of course, remembering that you can log in using our normal Ivanhoe password and username. So natural selection is a process where an environmental factor acts on a population and results in some organisms having more offspring than others. Okay, so there is an environmental factor that acts on the population, environmental or another organism, okay, and some organisms having more offspring than others. So this links into our idea of survival of the fittest, because the fittest organisms will be able to pass on their genetics to the next generation. So members of a species with an advantageous trait, okay, so a positive adaptation, okay, will survive and have a higher chance of reproducing, passing on their genetic material, so changing the gene frequency over time of the population, than members of the species without that trait. And our little diagram up here indicates the idea of giraffes evolving a longer neck over time. So the shorter animal here can't reach the leaves and alternative food source in the tree. There would be a lot of competition for food along the plains and the grasslands. So over time, this giraffe here that had an adaptation to be able to reach the higher branches would be able to get more food, live longer, and have more offspring. So, and it would carry the gene for the longer neck. So over time, that gene would become more prevalent in the population, and because the ones with the shorter neck wouldn't be able to get as much food, so they wouldn't survive as long if there was a shortage in food. So this means that they can have a diversification in their food. They're not competing as much. They're able to get more food. Therefore, the ones with longer necks will have more offspring, and the gene frequency will change over time. So we can look at this in terms of different things as well, not just availability of food, but our success in avoiding predators. So if we look at a population of mice where, say, we have 50% have a dark brown coat and 50% have a light brown coat, these mice would be preyed on by owls, okay, which hunt using a visual mode, so they have to be able to see their prey in order to attack it. So in areas where the ground color is dark, the light mice would be more easily seen. Okay, which means that the owls would find the light brown mice easier, so more of them are likely to be eaten. Okay, which would reduce their population, which would mean that their genes and the gene for the light coat is passed on less often, and over time the population is more likely to become dark brown. That doesn't mean no dark brown mice are being eaten, it just means that they're less likely to. So the chance of them being eaten is lower compared to a light brown mice. So therefore the population over time will change, and we're likely to see more dark brown mice in the population, a higher percentage of them. And this is what it would look like in a diagram. So the population of mice has moved to a new area. So this could be they've moved due to competition in their habitat, or they've escaped from being pets somewhere or something, and the population of mice has moved into a new area, and we have normal variation. Okay, so we have variation in the population. Okay, and that variation, some are white and some are black. The white ones are more easily seen, so more of them are eaten than the black ones, so they can reproduce, pass on the black gene, and the white mice, the gene starts to fade away over time because, again, more owls will eat them, so their genes are seen less frequently in the population. So Darwin put these stages into 5 stages of the process of natural selection. Number 1 being that there must be variation in the population. Okay, and this is what we talked about with genetic variation in the last video. This coming about due to sexual reproduction. Okay, and the way that our genes are swapped around a little bit during meiosis. Okay, also in mutation, okay, and the ways that we see variation in the population. Without variation, there can be no selection of different traits because all the traits would be the same. So the first step in a species evolving is there to be some kind of natural variation within the population of organisms, not everything being exactly the same genetically. More organisms are produced than survive, so this is that there is a loss of organisms along the way. So this can be due to disease, lack of food, lack of habitat, predation. Basically, that not all organisms, okay, will be able to reproduce. They will die before they have the chance to reproduce and pass on their genetic information. Okay, so the organisms with features that best suit their environment, so advantageous traits, okay, so mutations that are advantageous, or a trait like a long beak or something like that that increases their chance of survival and therefore increases their chance to reproduce and pass the genes on. The organisms that are able to survive and reproduce pass on their characteristics, so the genes are passed on to the next generation. And over time, we will see a change in the frequency of specific genes, and the population will become better suited to its environment. We will have a higher frequency, so a higher seeing in the population of the advantageous trait. Okay, remembering that we said that there can be traits that aren't advantageous, so but those don't tend to increase in frequency over time. Traits that are a negative impact on the individual, that would mean that they're actually going to be less likely to survive, so we would see them turning up less often. Okay, so the frequency of the genes increases to have that trait if that trait provides an advantage to the organism being able to survive. So the different selecting agents that we can have come under 2 categories, these being biotic, i.e. coming from bio, that they are living. Okay, so these can be predators, pathogens, so disease, competition for food, so competition with other organisms for food, habitat, and things like that. Okay, so if 2 different organisms live in a tree, there's going to be competition for that habitat, or caves, or things like that. Okay, the other thing that they can be are physical factors, abiotic factors, like the temperature, extreme temperature, so extreme cold, extreme heat. So think about environments like the Arctic, or around geothermal vents in the ocean, or around volcanoes. Okay, these are things that things would need to adapt to be able to live in those environments. The presence of fire that we often see in the Australian bush, different soil nutrients and water, all these different things, so flood and things like that, the weather can act as a selecting agent. Okay, so many selecting agents act by killing less fit or poorly adapted individuals. Okay, so predators are able to take off the weaker from the herd. So if one can't run as fast as the other, it's more likely to be caught, and therefore it will be killed off and removed from the genetic variation of that population. Okay, so we've got predators, availability of resources and nutrients, disease, and the accumulation of waste and different things like that, which come from biotic factors. Things like weather phenomena, temperature, CO2 levels, which is becoming an increasing problem in our own environment. Okay, weather conditions such as floods and storms as well. Okay. So we can have a look at this, looking at the peppered moth simulation, which you will do as part of our class activities. And this is due to a changing in the environment due to pollution. Okay, so this changed the bark color, okay, of a particular type of tree, which we see genetic variation in terms of light moths versus dark moths. Prior to pollution, the white moths were the higher population. After the pollution, we see the black moths becoming more common because of their better camouflage for the new environment. Okay, so the black moths have a better camouflage for the new environment, so they're less able to be seen by the predators, by the birds. So these white moths, which are clearly visible, okay, tend to be eaten more. Okay, so they are eaten more frequently. So over time, the frequency of the different colors of the moths in the population changed. So this links to the idea of survival of the fittest, okay, in that the organism with the combination of traits that has the best chance of survival can reproduce and pass on those traits. Okay, so they would be the fittest individual, the one that is able to live to reproduction age and have, I guess, the most children, passing on those traits to the largest portion of the population. Okay, and we can see this with pesticide resistance and antibiotic resistance. So pesticide resistance in bugs, antibiotic resistance in bacteria and things. They are going to be more successful if they have the gene for resistance than if they don't. Okay, we're not going to like that because we use these things to try and wipe out pests and bacteria, but that makes them more successful for what they want, which is to live longer. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our natural selection. You should be up to page 16 in your booklets now, and I'll see you next time we're in class.